Combat in Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 is quite in-depth and actually quite complicated. There are a lot of hidden mechanics and a lot of hidden things in the game that is not really explicitly explained, and it can leave players feeling a little bit confused and unsure of how it all works. But I'm going to try clear up some things and help you understand how combat works better so you can breeze through enemies and deal with the combat sequence of the game much more easily. So the first thing you're going to want to do is when you start the game and when you get to Truskowitz, there is going to be a beggar. I also like to call her Little Red Riding Hood because she kind of looks like Little Red Riding Hood with her whole red, full outfit of red. She will give you a quest, will lead you to a guy called Tomcat. This guy is going to be a jeweler. He's going to be a teacher. He's going to teach you how to do certain moves. If you beat him in a duel, I have a video discussing more in depth of how you can do that. I'll leave it in the comment section below. But if you beat him in a duel, he will teach you how to do the Master Strike. And the Master Strike is going to be one of the most effective combat moves in the game. It is going to essentially allow you to, instead of blocking, you can counterattack the exact opposite direction where your enemy attacks from. So if they attack up, you attack down. If they attack from the left, you attack from the right. When you see the little shield icon, instead of blocking, what you're going to do is you're going to attack in the exact opposite direction of where they attack from. This will allow you to do an attack back that is unblockable. Your enemy will guarantee get hit if you successfully time that right. It is a little bit tricky because sometimes enemies do kind of weird attacks where they attack from horizontal angles or whatnot, and then it's a bit more difficult to figure out where that attack is coming from. It's also a lot more difficult when there's a lot of enemies at once and they're all attacking from all different directions. It can be a bit confusing at times, but this is going to be one of the most effective ways to deal with enemies because if you time it right, you can give yourself an unblockable attack which will do sometimes very big damage to the enemies, and that is going to basically allow you to deal with enemies without needing to block. You can just counterattack and they can't do anything about that. A very important thing with Master Striking as well is to hold your sword or hold your stance in the, if you want to go for a Master Strike, hold your stance in the opposite direction of where your opponent's stance is. If their sword is on the left hand side and you want to Master Strike them, keep your sword hovered on the right hand side. If they're holding their sword above, keep your sword below so that when they attack, you are ready to just counterattack and do the Master Strike very easily that way. So always keep in mind where your opponent's stance is, and if you're going for a Master Strike, try keep it on the opposite side. That is going to be very, very important there. Speaking of Master Strike, the enemy can also Master Strike you back sometimes, so be mindful of that. Sometimes if you do end up attacking your enemy, if you're trying to, especially doing the block counter attack, they can end up Master Striking you back, so be careful with that because it is not exclusively only available to you, and sometimes your opponent can actually string together some unblockable attacks, and that can be a very easy way to lose HP quickly. The other method of combat is going to be counterattacking, which obviously we just discussed. It is going to be essentially where you block as soon as you see the little green shield, and then you attack back right after that block, a riposte. The problem with this is it is going to very often, especially when you meet high level enemies, they're going to end up blocking you back and then counterattacking you back, and then you can counterattack them, and then you're going to go back and forth quite a bit, and you're going to just drain your stamina. You're also kind of draining the enemy's stamina, but at the same time, if you're up against multiple enemies, then their other friends are going to have stamina as well, and then you're going to basically be annihilating each other's stamina and have nothing left to deal with the other enemies. So I typically don't love this attack. I mean, it's not terrible. You are going to get some hits in every now and then, but I find especially when it comes to high level enemies, they're going to counterattack your counterattack, and you're going to be back and forward just clashing swords and wasting your stamina away. So that is an option. It works, especially when it's maybe a 1 versus 1 or there's lower level enemies, but I think when you get to high level enemies, you definitely want to avoid this one because I think it is a common mistake that I think a lot of players just, you know, kind of how most games work. You parry, you counterattack, you block, you parry, you counterattack. In this game, it's not really going to reward you that much. Another aspect about combat, which I think is very valuable, which the game doesn't really explain, if you hold in your attack button, you are going to be able to hold your sword, you hold it in a certain direction, so you hold maybe on the right side or you hold on the upside, and then you can quickly counteract where you're going to attack from, which confuses the AI. So in other words, if you're holding your attack for a heavy attack or a charged attack on the right, you can quickly let go on the left side, and that may allow your opponent to try guard their right side. If they see you're going to attack from the right, they're going to put their sword up to the right hand side of themselves to protect their right hand side, and then if you quickly shift to the left and release on the left, you can attack them from the opposite side and get some sneaky hits in. It's a great way to bait the AI to put the guard up on the wrong side, and then you counterattack. This attack is actually, I didn't learn it until very late into the game, and it never really explained to you. You kind of have to figure this one on your own. Maybe there's an NPC that explains it to you better, but I never really learned about this until much late into the game, and it's actually a very good way and a very effective way of dealing with enemies, because enemies are going to be blocking themselves. They're going to look where you're attacking from, and they're going to hold their guard up where they think you're going to attack. So in order to break past certain attacks, sometimes what you can do is, like I said, hold your attack in a certain side and then quickly release on the opposite side or a different side to bait your enemy's guard. Another thing that's important quick note, another thing the game doesn't really explain to you is the jump button, or rather should I say the dodge button. If you press spacebar or your jump button, if you're playing on console of course, you can essentially dodge an attack rather than blocking an attack. This is great for getting back from jabs, especially when enemies jab you. It can be difficult to block those sometimes, and jumping backwards or dodging can be a great effective way at getting away from some attacks. So keep that in mind. You do have a dodge. It is going to drain stamina. Another very important thing to speak about is how does stamina work? Well, basically when you attack enemies, your stamina is going to go down. So keep in mind that when you just swing away at your sword or your axe or whatever, you're going to be draining stamina. If you don't have any stamina left, you're not going to be able to block incoming attacks, because when you block, you are going to require stamina to successfully deal with that block. And if you have no stamina left, then that damage is going to go straight to your health bar. You can kind of think of stamina in a way as a second health bar. Once your stamina is depleted, you are defenseless, like a shield almost actually. If your stamina is at 0, you have no shields left, all the damage is going to go to your health bar. As long as you have stamina, you are going to be able to block at least frontal attacks. The problem is if there are enemies in all around you, then they can kind of attack you from the sides or the back, and you, even if you're blocking, won't be able to block those. So another very important aspect is going to be your positioning. I think a very easy to overlook aspect of the game is how you position, and I like to make sure that all the enemies are in front of me. So try move in such a way where you gather the enemies in front of you and don't allow enemies to come from behind you. The enemies in this game aren't very often specifically going to come from behind you. Maybe there's enemies that are already behind you, they're coming to join the battle, they might come from behind, but otherwise if you position yourself well, the enemies aren't going to like actively run around you to try to surround you. They're going to gradually move towards you, but typically they're not going to actively go and try flank you. And just in general, try not get into massive fights where it's like 10 versus 1, because those are very hard to deal with. Most of the time the game isn't going to give you fights where you're excessively outnumbered. Like most of the time I think you're going to be outnumbered maybe 3 or 4 to 1 at worst. There are some small scenarios in the game where you will be outnumbered, where I guess stealth is kind of your go-to option in those scenarios, which is kind of realistic because the game is trying to be more realistic. In real life, you can't really take on 10 people at once. It's not going to go very well for you. Another aspect is combos. Now, combos are kind of iffy. I'm not a huge fan of combos because they leave you very vulnerable. What you have to essentially do is you got to string together certain directional attacks all at once. So if you, for example, you can go left, right, left, that's in a combo, or sometimes you can go like up, left, right, or there's a bunch of combos. You can unlock more by going to Tomcat. He can teach you a couple. You can give him some groschen and he will teach you some combos, and you will be able to learn quite a few of them. But I don't really love combos, especially when you're outnumbered. I find combos when you on 1 versus 1, it's not too bad, but when you're outnumbered, it can be very difficult to try string together a successful string of multiple attacks all after one another before you get interrupted by another enemy. Because if you're trying to do a 3 combo attack on one enemy, enemies in this game, they don't take turns. They're not going to fight fairly. They're not going to, it's not like a lot of other games where enemies attack one at a time. In this game, if there's 5 enemies, they're all going to, 5 of them going to try attack you at once. And if you're trying to execute a combo on one specific enemy and there's other enemies around that are going to try attack you, that's going to be very difficult to execute a full combo. So I think combos are better used when it comes to like 1 or 2 enemies, but when there are multiple enemies, probably rely more on things like Master Strike and probably try bait your enemy into attacking one side and then quickly shifting to another side. I think that's going to be the most effective way of doing that. Then there is also going to be the clenching of swords. So if you and your opponent come very close together to hold your swords like right up against each other's faces, that is going to activate kind of like a quick time event where you have to click the attack button in where the arrow points to either bump them back or do some damage to them. They also have the opportunity to counter attack you. So if you do that clenching animation, you see like a shield icon, then you have to block them like normal to prevent them from being able to like kind of bump you back. So keep that in mind as well. Clenching you can kind of initiate by if you get very close to them, if you attack them like point blank range, or you maybe jump towards them or dodge towards them and attack, you will sometimes get into that animation. It's a bit of a difficult one to initiate. I actually tried for this video getting into that animation quite a few times. It's not very easy to get into, but it does incidentally happen every now and then. It will happen naturally. So when it does happen, it's best to know what to do. And what you want to do again is when you see the little arrow below you of which direction to point, you want to attack in the direction of that arrow to basically either knock your opponent back or get a jab at them. This also works for melee combat. Sometimes you will end up grabbing your opponent or they'll end up grabbing you, and the same thing applies there. Speaking of different types of combat, there's obviously going to be sword fighting. There's going to be, you're going to use axes potentially. You're going to be using maces. There's lots of different types of weapons in the game. Some are going to do slashing damage. Some of them are going to do blunt damage. I find master striking is very valuable. So for that reason, I prefer to use swords. You can either use a one-handed sword or a two-handed sword. Now, the advantage of using a one-handed sword is that you can actually hold a shield as well, which will give you a better boost to your defense at the cost of having a little bit less reach and a little bit less damage with the one-handed sword. But then you also have a two-handed sword, which will also allow you to do master strike. I think fist fighting also gives you the option of master striking, but don't quote me on that one. But because of the fact that swords have master striking, I think swords are going to be the most effective weapon in the game. Now, there are going to be other weapons as well, like I said, but for the purposes of being able to unlock the master strike ability, I think you're going to want to be using either a long sword or a one-handed sword with a shield is going to be your best bet in terms of combat. Otherwise, I hope this guide helps you learn combat. Combat is, again, one of the more difficult aspects of the game. I think a lot of people are struggling with it because of a lot of mechanics the game just isn't really explaining to you. So you kind of have to figure it out and learn it on your own through trial and error. There are going to be some NPCs that are going to teach you some combat moves and teach you some tips, but otherwise that's going to cost you money. And obviously, if you don't have a lot of money, if you're in the beginning section of the game, you're not going to have a whole lot, so it can be a bit difficult to learn these things. Combat is definitely something that is going to require a little bit of experimentation, a little bit of trial and error. Once you get the hang of timing, it becomes a lot easier. Like in the beginning, I was struggling to even deal with one enemy. Definitely is something that you will improve on over time, but it will help if you know all these like hidden mechanics the game doesn't really explain to you. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, don't forget to like and subscribe, and let me know in the comment section below if there's any other tips or any other aspects of the game that you're struggling with, or anything you want me to cover. Take care, everyone, and bye-bye.